Hey everybody, it is Monday, September 14th, 2020, back for another economic financial news update here. As we continue to progress through this devastating economic downturn that is being masked by all of the support and propping up via the Fed. And we're going to look at some interesting articles today. But first, let's just take a look at the markets. We had a nice move today, 1% of the S&P, over 1% of the Dow, and almost 2% of the NASDAQ. Russell 2000 over 2%. That was the biggest mover today. Oil still holding around $37. Now gold had a nice bid today, up about 1% to $19.67. Silver even better, up 2% to $27.42. Now speaking of silver and gold, people are still asking me if I am buying. Yes, I am still accumulating as much as I can. Well, I should say not as much as I can. I've scaled back, but I'm still accumulating with at least one purchase a month. Not as much as I did back when it was $17, $18, $19. I've scaled back a little bit. And yes, I still think it's going to go higher. I wouldn't be surprised to see it drop to 25, 24, maybe 3 at the bottom if I had to guess. But again, this is not investment advice. Do your own due diligence. Do your own due diligence, if I could say that word. This is just what I'm doing based on my current situation. Okay, also speaking of silver, let's take a look at a nice chart that I found here. This is the Dow Jones to silver ratio. And this tells us one of two things, or maybe a combination of both. One, the stock market, the Dow Jones, is way overinflated, overvalued. The other is that silver is very undervalued. And we look and see the ratio was only higher at the end of 1999, early 2000s, at the peak of the dot-com bubble. And we look to the far right here, we see that we peaked out back in November at about 1807 on the Dow to silver ratio. That ratio has dropped a little bit since we did see strong moves in silver. Silver actually outperforming the Dow here in the past 6 months or so. Now, while the stock market, the Dow Jones anyways, has yet to surpass the peak that we saw right before the shutdown, close to 30,000 on the Dow Jones, silver has gained nicely. It was about $17.90 a year ago, and we're sitting just above $27.30 right now. And the way things are going right now in this inflationary environment, I'm not going to be taking any silver off the table. I'm not going to be selling any until around $50. And when $50 hits, it's only going to be a small amount. I might take 5% off the table, but holding most of it for more upside. I could be wrong. Again, this is not advice, but people are asking what I'm doing, where I'm investing. All right, but overall, silver, I've only got about 15% of my total, let's say, portfolio into silver. Now, I heard an interview with Michael Pinto just recently over at, I think the channel was called The Watchdog. And he is a professional money manager, and he's now in 20%, including his clients, has them at 20%. The portfolio into precious metals. All right, so something to think about if you're interested. There is a link below. It does help out the channel if you buy down there. Just look down in description. All right, now before we move on to some other news, just want to thank you to everyone for getting us to 68,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support. All right, but here's the reality of our situation as a country. The debt is beyond sustainable. And for many, many years now, it's been at a point where it can never be paid off. And actually, when you look at the type of system that we're in, how are we to ever pay debt off when money is created out of nothing, when currency is created out of nothing? Some people would say it's not even money, but let's call it currency. And when there's interest attached, you have to somehow come up with the interest to pay back the principal plus the interest. But unless you print more money to put it into the system, into the economy, the money that equals the interest that you need to pay back has not been created yet. So it's a never-ending cycle of printing. And in this case, it's not just the Fed. Banks issue money that's not yet in existence. It's called the fractional reserve banking system. So when people say the Fed's printing money, well, it's actually the banks. The banks are issuing money that doesn't exist. So the banks, your brick and mortar banks, Bank of America, Chase, your local credit union, they're creating money out of nothing. Right? So it's not just the Fed in this case, but we know that the banks and the Fed are basically, they've become one big monster. And when you look back to what happened in March, now we don't even have a fractional reserve banking system anymore. It's the no reserve banking system is what we have now. It's been about 6 months. So they can keep this system going, and you'll likely see more inflation. And people kind of laughed at us and made fun of us when we said the housing bubble was not going to go bust in 2020. We were right about that. A lot of people laughed, made fun of us when we said the stock market was going to recover and happening. We're going to hit 30,000 probably in the Dow Jones this year. But more and more people are waking up. I see it down in comments. People know that it's all rigged, it's manipulated, that what we're seeing, the valuations in homes and even in the stock market, has nothing to do with the health of Main Street, with the U.S. consumer, with the middle class. The middle class essentially is being decimated. And you see it with just a recent report we put out that 40% of renters say they're not going to be able to pay their rent here this month in September. So does that sound like an economic recovery to you, where 40% of the people say they can't not pay the rent? We're also still seeing about 1 in 3 people not paying their mortgage, right? And the eviction moratoriums and the foreclosure forbearances, the mortgage forbearances, those are some of the masks that are being used to keep this economy looking like it's not falling apart. But if you're on this channel, you know that this economy has been falling apart. And the further we go, the more action that has to be taken. And, what's going to be next? Is it going to be, I've joked about this, but some people think this is actually possible. What's going to be next? The 40 or 50-year mortgage? Right, the 9 or 10-year car loan. What sounded insane just a few years ago, now people are saying, well, that's not going to surprise me if that happens. But again, Main Street, the middle class, they are feeling it, and we report here often about the homeless crisis, so we know it's growing, especially in California. But Walmart used to allow people to park their RVs in the parking lot. Well, there's been a few reports here, and here's one here. Walmart's no longer allowing that because the lots got so full in some cases. The RVs and the people parking there overnight were starting to encroach on the actual customer parking area. And this article says that some stores are no longer allowing that. I'm going to guess it's a lot of stores here in California where the homeless crisis is the worst. But more people now are living in RVs and campers. We're going to see more of that, especially with the fires and all the evacuees. But also when the cost of living continues to rise, when home prices are out of reach for so many people, and you see this economic devastation, it's pretty sad. People are running out of places to park and no longer at many Walmarts. Let's check in on the stimulus check situation. And the question is still if a new stimulus package or executive order grants the American people a new stimulus check, it's likely to be up to $1,200 per adult. Now, there's still a lot of back and forth going on between the Dems and the Repubs. The Dems, they wanted more money to go to cities that have been torn apart. And on the right, they're saying, no, that's not fair. The cities didn't do anything to stop the destruction. And why should we reward the cities when they didn't accept the federal help that was offered? And to sum it up, it's just a big mess. And with all the commotion happening right now in the U.S., all the unrest and division, a lot of people are saying that this is all engineered as a distraction to cover up the economic collapse and to allow the government to bring in new measures that are going to further have people dependent on the government. It was already bad even before this whole situation, before the shutdown, where so many people were dependent on the government. But it's close to 70% of the people now are dependent on the government in some way or shape or form. And typically, we've seen this in other countries where the government starts to get involved. It's very hard to wean off of that government support. It's kind of like a drug. You get hooked, and just to maintain the status quo, you need more and more and more. So then you can never pull back on the support. Otherwise, it all comes crashing down. And then certain people don't want to get blamed for the destruction or decline in the economy or the economic crash. So I expect this economic bubble madness to continue until they find either one, an excuse for bringing the whole thing down, or two, until they're no longer incentivized to keep it propped up. But when it is finally allowed to implode, when it is allowed to come down and crash, it's going to be the worst economic collapse that anyone's seen, because of the level of dependency, the indebtedness of the nation and individuals, the lack of self-sufficiency. It's going to be way beyond the Great Depression if it's allowed to collapse. Now, what could save us is a complete retransformation of the economic system. And no one sees that coming right now unless there's a surprise that comes out of the back pocket of the administration. Some sort of massive debt forgiveness, debt jubilee. But many other people think that this is going to be an absolute nightmare and push us into a cashless society where everyone has to be tracked and traced. It's going to be complete control. And that's what is allowed to happen when the government has so much control over you and your life. Once you get dependent on the government, then you are essentially a slave to whatever the government wants. And if the government's corrupt, well, they can turn our lives into a living hell. So let's hope it's the good instead of the bad transformation. Nothing we can do but prepare. Try to keep your eyes open. Stay well, everybody. Bye for now.